It began with a lunch tray and a glance that went unnoticed by anyone else. The cafeteria buzzed with its usual chaos. Trays clattering, chairs scraping, the echo of laughter bouncing off cinderblock walls. Fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, their harsh hum cutting through the chatter, casting shadows that danced over the polished linoleum. Children moved in clusters, forming the constellations of friendship and rivalry, while a single boy sat apart. His hair fell like a curtain over his eyes, hiding the fear and curiosity that no one else seemed to notice. His tray held little more than a half-eaten piece of bread, untouched by the chaos around him. He glanced up once, scanning the room, not for friendship, not for approval, just for recognition. Nobody met his gaze. Nobody acknowledged him, and in that invisibility, he carried himself with a quiet dignity, an awareness that he existed in the margins of a world that did not pause to see him. Across the room, a teacher paused mid-step, her hand lingering on a stack of lunch orders. Her eyes caught the boy, not because he was exceptional, not because he demanded attention, but because he was quietly present in a way that most overlooked. There was no heroism in noticing him, no grand gesture, just the simple recognition of a life that had been passed over. Pause, a glance, a decision. The teacher approached the boy's table, her footsteps measured, deliberate. She didn't speak yet. She didn't ask questions. She simply set a tray down in front of him. A sandwich, an apple, a small carton of milk. Nothing extraordinary, nothing that would make headlines. But to the boy, it was extraordinary. To him, it was a sign that someone finally had seen him. That in a world that had ignored him, someone cared. Around them, the cafeteria continued unabated. Friends teased one another, spilled juice, laughed too loud, and the lunchroom supervisor barely raised an eyebrow at the noise. But in that moment, there was a stillness between the teacher and the boy. A small, almost imperceptible connection had been made, invisible to the world around them but monumental in the life of the boy who had gone unnoticed for too long. That simple act, a lunch paid for, a tray placed in front of him, a silent acknowledgement of his existence, would ripple across time. It was the first domino in a chain that would stretch 20 years into the future. A chain that would transform not just the boy's life, but the life of the teacher who had seen him. In a world full of overlooked moments and lost opportunities, this one gesture would become the axis around which a remarkable story of gratitude, impact, and transformation would turn. No one in the cafeteria knew it yet. They didn't see the future in that half-eaten piece of bread. They didn't know that a single glance, a quiet act of kindness, could someday echo through decades. But that moment, the pause, the tray, the recognition, was the beginning of something extraordinary. Something that would eventually bring them back together, in a way neither could have imagined. And it all started with a simple, overlooked lunch. The boy didn't speak much. Words were a currency he spent sparingly, and in the bustling cafeteria, they often went unnoticed. His home life was a quiet one, but not by choice. Shadows lingered behind closed doors, conversations left unsaid, and a presence that hovered just out of reach. School was his sanctuary, yet even here, the margins were where he dwelled. He observed, recorded, and endured, a quiet witness to the noise, laughter, and chaos around him. Each day was a careful navigation of the invisible walls that separated him from others. The teacher, Mrs. Ellis, noticed not just the lunch tray moment, but the way he carried himself through hallways, the subtle hesitation at the edge of playground games, the eyes that flicked up just long enough to catch a fleeting sense of normalcy before retreating. She wasn't a heroine. She wasn't seeking to be. She simply saw something most overlooked. A mind capable of more than the labels applied by circumstance. A soul waiting for someone to recognize its presence. Over the following weeks, she watched quietly. She offered small gestures. A notebook left on his desk, a question asked in class that required no answer but allowed him to participate. A moment to demonstrate a skill no one else noticed. Each act was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet cumulative. To the boy, it became a lifeline, a signal that someone believed in him, not because he demanded attention, but because he deserved it. Life outside the school was not so forgiving. Bullies found his silence easy prey, mocking his withdrawn nature, tugging at the curtains of hair that shielded his eyes from the world. Teachers, overburdened and distracted, dismissed him as quiet, compliant, forgettable. And yet, in the shadow of all of this, Mrs. Ellis's quiet interventions became a shield, an unseen scaffold that allowed him to hold himself upright when the weight of neglect pressed too hard. It wasn't immediate transformation. It wasn't dramatic speeches or sudden recognition. It was small, almost invisible. A kind word after a mistake, a nod of approval for a drawing, a question about his thoughts that required no right answer, only reflection. These were the moments where a child learns that being seen is as essential as being fed, that acknowledgement can be sustenance in itself. For Mrs. Ellis, it was a lesson in patience and perception. She realized that greatness often resides in the shadows, unnoticed and uncelebrated until someone takes the time to recognize it. And in her recognition of this quiet boy, she planted seeds not just for him, but for the ripple effects that would later redefine both of their lives. It was in these moments, the small, unobserved kindnesses, that a future began to take shape. One that neither the boy nor the teacher could yet imagine. A trajectory that would stretch 2 decades into the future, culminating in an act of gratitude that would be as monumental as it was unexpected. For now, however, the cafeteria remained a stage of ordinary chaos, the boy a silent observer, and the teacher a quiet architect of potential. And in this ordinary moment, the extraordinary was quietly unfolding. Time moved forward in its usual relentless way, yet to the boy each year brought subtle changes that seemed monumental only in hindsight. The cafeteria lunches, once a place of isolation, became markers of small victories. Mrs. Ellis's interventions were no longer invisible, they had taken root. He began to answer questions in class, first in whispers, then with quiet confidence that grew bolder with each correct response. Mathematics, once a source of silent anxiety, became a puzzle he solved not to impress anyone, but to prove to himself that he could. Outside the classroom, the boy's world began to expand. He joined a small after-school program, initially just to escape the loneliness of an empty playground. There, he discovered books, histories, stories of distant lands, biographies of people who had, like him, started in quiet obscurity. He read about inventors, activists, artists, and entrepreneurs who changed the course of their worlds through persistence and vision. Each page was a whisper of possibility, a signal that his own story need not end in silence. Mrs. Ellis continued to guide him, not through grand gestures, but through the subtle shaping of character. She encouraged his curiosity, offered feedback on essays, and introduced him to concepts that most children his age would never encounter. Yet she never pushed too hard. She allowed him to take ownership of his growth, to make mistakes and learn from them. In doing so, she gave him something more than knowledge, the understanding that he could carve his own path, and that failure was not a measure of worth. A defining moment came in the 10th grade. The boy, now a young man of 16, entered a citywide science competition. He had chosen a project that reflected his quiet observations of the world, a study on water purification in urban areas. For weeks, he worked after school, sometimes in near silence, refining experiments, adjusting variables, recording results. Mrs. Ellis provided guidance when asked, never solving problems for him, but illuminating paths he had not considered. The day of the competition arrived, and the boy's project was displayed alongside those of his peers. Judges circulated, questioning students, evaluating methodology and insight. He stood beside his work, eyes alert, voice steady, conveying a depth of understanding far beyond his years. When the awards were announced, he didn't just place, he excelled. Recognition came, not as a fleeting nod, but as validation of effort, resilience, and intellect. For the first time, he felt the weight of his potential, tangible and undeniable. That victory, small in the eyes of the world but monumental in his personal journey, became the catalyst for further achievements. Scholarships followed. Invitations to programs, mentorships, and leadership opportunities opened doors previously hidden. Each success was a step away from invisibility, a movement from the shadows into a world that was starting to see him as more than the quiet boy with a half-eaten piece of bread. Yet through all this progress, he never forgot the teacher who first saw him. Mrs. Ellis remained a constant, quiet presence in the background of his life. Her belief had been the foundation upon which he built confidence, ambition, and, ultimately, the tools to shape a future that reached beyond himself. The turning point was not a single moment, but a series of small awakenings, each one fueled by guidance, empathy, and opportunity. It was a delicate orchestration of timing, patience, and vision, a reminder that the trajectory of a life can be altered not by grand gestures alone, but by consistent, thoughtful support. And in that support lay the seeds of a story that would one day close a circle in the most extraordinary way imaginable. The quiet student, transformed, returning the favor in a manner that would touch countless lives. Adulthood arrived like a tide, both inevitable and unforgiving. The boy, now a young man, stepped into a world that measured worth in dollars, deadlines, and degrees, not in quiet resilience or unseen potential. University was his first frontier, and it was a landscape both thrilling and intimidating. Here, intellect was currency, but humility was invisible. He navigated lecture halls filled with brilliant minds, many confident, some dismissive, all competing for recognition. Yet he carried within him a quiet strength honed in years of solitude and perseverance. The struggle was not only academic. Financial burdens shadowed his every move. Scholarships covered portions of tuition, but rent, textbooks, and living expenses were relentless. He worked nights in cafes and libraries, repairing computers, tutoring younger students, and doing what was necessary to keep the dream alive. Each job was a reminder that the world outside school was unrelenting, that talent alone was rarely enough to guarantee progress. Yet, the quiet lessons from Mrs. Ellis, the belief that persistence outweighs immediate reward, echoed with him in every challenge. Relationships tested him too. The world of peers was noisy, often superficial, and at times cruel. Some colleagues underestimated him, dismissing his soft-spoken demeanor as weakness. Others attempted to exploit it, assigning him menial tasks or ignoring his input in collaborative projects. Each slight stung, but it also sharpened his resolve. He learned the subtle art of observation, the power of patience, and the strategic weight of waiting until the moment was right to act. Then came the first major setback, an entrepreneurial venture that he had invested months of work, creativity, and hope into collapsed under circumstances beyond his control. Partners withdrew, funding fell through, and legal complications arose. The failure could have defined him, could have justified giving in to self-doubt, but he remembered the quiet boy in the cafeteria, who had survived years of invisibility by holding on to small, steady victories. He adapted. He analyzed what went wrong, recalibrated, and began again, each misstep a lesson, each delay a proving ground. Family expectations added another layer of pressure. Parents had sacrificed, worked multiple jobs, and hoped that their son's brilliance would translate into security and prestige. The weight of their expectations was invisible yet heavy, a reminder that success was not just personal but shared. The young man carried it with dignity, yet sometimes in private moments, the exhaustion was tangible: late nights, skipped meals, and the constant mental arithmetic of balancing dreams against reality. Through all of this, Mrs. Ellis's influence remained a subtle, steady force. She called sporadically, never imposing advice, but always asking questions that made him reflect on purpose, ethics, and the life he wanted to build. Her encouragement was never loud, but it was relentless in its quiet insistence: to act with integrity, to honor opportunity, and to remember the lessons of kindness, attention, and belief. The struggle of adulthood was not a single obstacle but a continuous, evolving trial. A series of small battles against external pressures, internal doubts, and the invisible forces of life that sought to limit him. It was during these years, in the quiet moments of reflection, that he began to imagine a way to honor those who had believed in him. A gesture not of charity, but of transformation. A dream that would bridge his past, his struggles, and the future. It was in this crucible of struggle that the foundation of the ultimate act of gratitude was laid. a vision so audacious it would take years to manifest. Yet it was seated in every late-night decision, every job taken out of necessity, and every silent victory over adversity. Years had passed since the boy, now a man, had last seen Mrs. Ellis. The memory of that small gesture, the lunch tray, the quiet acknowledgement in a bustling cafeteria, remained vivid, a cornerstone of his identity. It was not just gratitude that drove him forward. It was the understanding of how a single act of kindness could ripple outward, shaping a life in ways no one could foresee. That lesson, once intangible, now became a guiding principle. As he built his career, first cautiously and then with increasing confidence, the vision of giving back began to crystallize. He had reached a point of stability and influence, his ventures successful enough to allow for meaningful philanthropic work. Yet, the idea was never about public recognition. It was about Mrs. Ellis, the quiet woman who had believed in a boy the world overlooked, who had invested her time, attention, and compassion without expectation. She had seen him when others didn't, and that recognition had become a foundation for everything he accomplished. The plan started modestly. He began collecting stories from teachers and students, understanding the challenges faced by underfunded schools. He researched educational disparities, noting the lack of resources, the outdated textbooks, and the overcrowded classrooms. Every fact he uncovered reinforced his determination. The gift he envisioned had to be more than symbolic. It had to be transformative. Months of planning followed. Architects, educators, and local officials were consulted. Locations were scouted, designs were drafted, and budgets meticulously calculated. The goal was clear: to build a school that not only carried Mrs. Ellis's name but embodied her philosophy. Each classroom would encourage curiosity, each hallway would honor creativity, and every corner would reflect the dignity and respect she had shown to every student, especially those overlooked. Yet, even with resources and knowledge, there were obstacles. Bureaucracy, funding approvals, and zoning regulations threatened to slow the project. Critics questioned the feasibility of a private individual undertaking such a monumental task. Friends warned him about the legal complexities, the public scrutiny, and the inevitable delays. But he pressed forward, motivated by the memory of that quiet lunchroom moment. What had seemed small then, the simple act of buying a lunch, had been monumental in effect, and he refused to let bureaucracy diminish that impact. Finally, the foundation was laid. The first walls rose, each brick placed with intention, each corner a silent homage to the teacher who had shaped him. He oversaw construction personally, ensuring that every detail aligned with the vision. Inclusive spaces for learning, gardens to inspire exploration, libraries stocked with books that invited curiosity rather than conformity. He wanted the environment itself to communicate the same message Mrs. Ellis had silently given him decades earlier: that every individual mattered and every potential deserved recognition. Through it all, he never sought her attention directly. The project was as much about personal fulfillment as it was about honor. Yet, he imagined her walking through the hallways, seeing children engaged in projects that once would have been impossible in their schools. He imagined her pride, quiet yet profound, and it spurred him to push further, to refine the design, to ensure the legacy was more than bricks and mortar. It was an ethos of empathy, belief, and opportunity. And as the school began to take shape, a deeper realization emerged. The act of giving back was not just about honoring the past. It was about shaping a future, about showing that one person's attention, one teacher's kindness, could echo across decades and transform countless lives. The morning of the grand opening arrived with a crisp clarity, the kind that carried both anticipation and quiet awe. The school stood complete, its gleaming windows reflecting the soft autumn light, the freshly painted walls a mosaic of hope and promise. Students chattered in the playground, their voices carrying an energy that filled every corner of the newly built classrooms. For the man who had built it, every sound was a reminder of why this project had begun decades earlier with a simple lunch tray. He stood at the entrance, dressed simply, yet the weight of the moment pressed on him like a physical presence. Today, all the planning, the obstacles, the long nights of decision-making culminated in a single purpose: to honor the teacher who had believed in him when no one else did. And now he would see her again. Mrs. Ellis arrived, walking slowly along the pathway lined with banners and balloons, her eyes taking in the school with the same quiet, meticulous attention she had once given her students. Her hands trembled slightly, not from age alone, but from the swell of emotions she had tried to keep contained. She had never anticipated this, never imagined that her small gesture so many years ago could have rippled into something tangible, something so monumental. The moment they saw each other, time seemed to suspend. 2 decades of life, separate experiences, and unspoken gratitude collided in a single gaze. The man approached first, extending a hand, but she stopped him with a gentle touch to his shoulder. No words were necessary. None could convey the depth of what had passed between them in those years. Every silent moment, every memory, every quiet lesson of care and attention had led to this reunion. Inside the school, rooms buzzed with a quiet excitement. Students lined up to participate in the first day of classes, their backpacks bright, their curiosity palpable. Each classroom was a testament not just to learning, but to belonging, spaces designed to foster attention to every child, the way Mrs. Ellis had attended to him. The library brimmed with books chosen to challenge, to inspire, to expand horizons. The art rooms glowed with color, each corner a deliberate invitation for exploration. As they walked together through the halls, he shared stories of his journey, the moments that had shaped him, and the vision behind the school. She listened, tears gathering in her eyes, realizing the true impact of her past actions. A simple act, buying lunch for a quiet, overlooked student, had ignited a chain of events that now brought her here, standing in a school full of hope and potential. In the courtyard, students gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Cameras flashed, officials gave speeches, but their attention was elsewhere. The man and Mrs. Ellis shared a quiet moment, the bustle of the event fading into background noise. He handed her a small plaque, engraved with her name, positioned at the heart of the school, a permanent acknowledgement of her compassion, her vision, her belief in the unseen. As she touched the plaque, her hand lingering, she whispered softly, "I never knew it would go this far." He shook his head, smiling. "You started it. I only followed where you led." And in that instant, the past and present converged. The quiet lunchroom act, long ago, had blossomed into a living testament. One teacher's kindness could change the trajectory of a life, and in turn, the lives of countless others. It was a moment of closure, of fulfillment, and yet also a beginning. A new chapter for the students, the community, and for the bond between teacher and student that had transcended time. As the students poured into their classrooms, their laughter and curiosity filling the hallways, the man and Mrs. Ellis stepped aside, taking a quiet moment to reflect on the journey that had brought them here. The magnitude of what they were witnessing wasn't just in the bricks and mortar of the school. It was in the ripple effects of small, intentional acts, the unseen moments of care that accumulate over time. For Mrs. Ellis, the realization was profound. She had spent her career quietly tending to the needs of students, giving attention to those who were overlooked, and offering guidance without expectation. That small gesture, buying lunch for a quiet boy who had slipped under the radar, had never seemed extraordinary at the time. But standing here now, seeing the tangible outcome of that act, she understood the true power of human connection. Compassion, when given without anticipation of reward, could echo across decades. The man reflected too. He remembered the isolation, the quiet moments of longing for recognition, and the small spark that Mrs. Ellis had ignited in him. Her belief in his worth had been a turning point, a gentle nudge that gave him the courage to envision something greater for himself and for others. That spark had grown into a mission, to create a space where no child would feel invisible, where every student would have the chance to thrive. They both knew the school represented more than a building. It symbolized a philosophy of attention, empathy, and the power of noticing the unnoticed. Every classroom, every hallway, every carefully chosen detail of the school carried a story, a memory of what it meant to be seen, to be believed in, to have someone care enough to act. But even in this moment of triumph, a shadow lingered. a secret the man had kept for years. One that, if revealed, could change everything Mrs. Ellis thought she knew about the impact she had on him. A hidden piece of the past, buried like so many quiet acts of kindness, waiting for the right moment to surface. As the students settled into their lessons, both teacher and former student felt a quiet satisfaction, a resonance that went beyond words. The school was not just a gift to the community. It was a testament to human potential, to the unseen bonds that can guide a life from quiet obscurity to meaningful impact. And yet, in the back of the man's mind, a question persisted. Something he had discovered years ago. Something that could alter the narrative of gratitude, success, and inspiration they had both come to celebrate. It was a mystery intertwined with his own journey, one that would not remain hidden forever. As the camera pans across the bright eyes of the children filling the classrooms, the quiet boy of the lunchroom had become a man of vision, but what he had carried with him all these years could change everything. And that discovery would come to light in ways no one could have predicted.
This was Trace Crime Files. Subscribe for more stories where truth is stranger than fiction, and justice is never as simple as it seems.